and everywhere. It's fantastic. Okay, we're gonna see if we can go live on the other platform so we can get going. All of these replays will be on my YouTube channel, but I think it's fun to go live and kind of have these conversations. So a lot of what I do, good morning, everyone. A lot of what I do is focused on perimenopause and menopause. And one of the biggest things that I am looking at in this population is weight management, because this is a lot of these patients' concerns, right? They just can't lose weight no matter what they do. They feel like they're starving. They, can't eat little enough, and it's all kind of, circling the drain a little bit. So I want to talk about some of the nuance, and I also want to talk about some recent research that links into the idea of calories in, calories burnt, that concept, why weight loss is so complex. On TikTok, we have This Is Me, Have Given Up, and I can totally appreciate that because so many patients I work with are in the exact same spot. So this is why I want to have this conversation. So let's just start kind of with the basics, okay? So when we look at just weight gain in general, we know that you have to be in a nutrition surplus in order to gain weight, okay? How that happens is a number of reasons, right? It's not just it's not just one thing. But I want to just lay out some foundational knowledge so that you can kind of understand what I'm talking about and where this foundation comes from. But essentially what happens is we have a few, moving pieces. Number one, what often happens is women are gaining weight in midlife. And some of the reasons for that have to do with hormonal changes. So we know that changing estrogen is partially responsible for the influence of insulin resistance. Okay. And so when estrogen is fluctuating and ends up declining, or there's some hormonal imbalance, before perimenopause, even, your body is more likely to be insulin resistant. Now, insulin resistance kind of fuels this bigger picture, right? There's the first piece where we have the cravings, right? If we're more insulin resistant, we're more likely to have cravings. If we're more likely to have cravings, we're less likely to be able to stick to kind of whatever that goal is, whatever nutrition goal we should be sticking to, or caloric deficit. We're more likely to crave sweets and all of those things, right? With insulin resistance, we're less likely to understand our own hunger cues. Okay. So, what essentially happens is when we are hungry, we have a hormone called ghrelin. Ghrelin, think about ghrelin, grr, makes us hungry. Leptin is our satiety hormone. This tells us when we're full. In an insulin resistant state, you're less likely to be able to understand those cues. Okay. So we have kind of a spiral that happens. It's like one thing after another. It's not just one thing, right? It's potentially, I'm going to paint a picture because this can happen in so many scenarios, but I'm going to paint a picture with a weight loss conversation. So, a female starts to hit perimenopause, right? Now they are moving less than they used to be when they, let's say, had little kids. So they might be a little bit more sedentary. Then, we layer on the fact that their hormones have changed. Now they're more insulin resistant, more likely to have cravings. We know also the hormone changes is going to equal less muscle mass. So we have less muscle mass, and that is going to worsen body composition. We have more fat tissue overall. That more fat tissue is going to be more inflammatory. That more inflammation is going to further drive that cycle of insulin resistance. Cravings are going to worsen, right? Now we're in a scenario we cannot get out of because we are not sensitive to our own signals for satiety with leptin and ghrelin with hunger. We can't trust our own body. This is the conversation I start to have with my patients when I say, we implement. So one of the tests I run, just as a side note, we're not going to go too into this, but one of the tests I run is the insulin glucose challenge. The insulin glucose challenge looks at the way your body manages sugar. And this is after eating. So it's not looking at just like a fasted level. This is looking at after eating, what happens, right? That's what I'm mostly interested in. And some of the strategies we implement when we look at a test like that is we decide, should you be intermittent fasting? Should you be doing 3 meals, no snacks? Should you be eating every 3 hours, right? We look at your overall picture of blood sugar balance and we decide how we change the strategy. And the reason why we do that, the thing I say to patients is intermittent fasting is not forever. Eating every 3 hours is not forever. But the reality is when you are in a body who doesn't have the capacity to intuitively eat, right? Again, like I said, you can't trust your full signals and you can't trust your hunger signals. A lot of people who are in insulin resistance end up being hungry when they shouldn't be and not hungry when they should be, right? Like we see this pattern where these patients are, they'll tell me, Laura, I'm just not hungry in the morning. I can't eat in the morning. But then the nighttime comes and all I want to do is eat, right? I have craving after craving after craving. So, in my opinion, we say, okay, so we can't trust what the body's telling us. And so, what we have to do is we have to intentionally choose a way that we're going to intervene to account for the way your body handles blood sugar to get you out of that space. Once we've reset it, once we can trust your body's hunger and full signals, then we can go back to intuitive eating. Then we can go back to regular eating. I tell patients all the time, for those who don't know my history, I've gone through a little bit of a weight loss journey on my own. And a lot of my patients will say, so what do you do? And if you look back at my videos, you can see the weight loss journey because I tend to hold weight in my face, which is real fun. But I digress. Patients will say to me, how do you eat? Do you intermittent fast? Do you do 3 meals, no snacks? Like, do you avoid certain foods? And I say, no, because I've gotten to the point where now I'm a little bit more intuitive. I eat when I'm hungry. I wake up in the morning, I'm hungry. I eat my meal. I'm actually satisfied till, if I eat at 6, I'm satisfied till 11, right? And so we can start to retrust our body when things are a little bit more balanced. So that's kind of the first piece of that, right? It's like, how did we get there? How did we gain weight? It's multifactorial. It is truly multifactorial. If we look at this from purely like a perimenopause, menopause, hormonal standpoint, we see a lot of things that lead us there. Like I said, estrogen changes, insulin resistance goes up, we're moving less. We are we could be having poor sleep. We know one night of poor sleep influences your blood sugar regulation. So you could be like 40% less sensitive to sugar when you've had one night of poor sleep. And so all of this compounds and compounds and compounds, and we slowly gain weight over time. And now we are at a place where we feel like we can't get out of. And one of the reasons why we can't get out of that is because we throw ourselves into a calorie deficit. That calorie deficit is typically too low because we are not burning enough calories at our new body, right? Typically at the age of perimenopause and menopause, or in your 30s or older, your body isn't burning as much calories because of all the reasons that I mentioned. And so we throw ourselves into a calorie deficit. That calorie deficit is too low to be sustainable. We are not losing weight because it potentially is not low enough to actually put us into enough of a deficit, or you don't know how to track progress. We'll get there. And then we kind of, we stop completely, we give up, and we go in the complete opposite direction. So what I often find is that when we talk about the calorie deficit, and I want to talk about some research beyond a calorie deficit because there's a lot of reasons why this may or may not work, but just harping on the calorie deficit on its own, we have to think about a few things. Number one, my rule of thumb with patients is I love a good tracking situation. And before I lose you on that, I want you to hear me out. I truly and wholeheartedly believe that we don't understand as a society portion sizes that are right and appropriate for our body. And I think that whether your goal is to lose weight, maintain weight, change body composition, build muscle, stay healthy, meet your nutrient goals, I think that tracking and really understanding portion and nutrient composition are the foundations of health. Okay. Now, we don't have to do this in a crazy, take up all your time, take up all your hours of your day situation, but I think that we need to do it. And so, lots of people are like, that's overwhelming. I feel like maybe you have a history or a relationship with food that doesn't feel aligned for your needs. And I will often challenge that into the add more mentality, right? I am 35 and I was, growing up in the toxic diet culture, world where everybody was skinny, everybody was restricting. And what I found is the way that I used to look at this has dramatically shifted with my mindset. And so the way a lot of people start to look at tracking is they look at it as restriction. They look at it as, calorie hoarding. So if they have an amount for the day, they're like, okay, well, I'm not going to eat anything all day because I need to make sure that I can eat at the end of the day when I'm super hungry and I have a craving. And so I try to challenge my patients to look at it in the exact opposite way. How am I fueling my body? And I think the best way to start is to just understand, what does my body need just to stay where I am? Even if you're not happy where you are, even if you're like, oh, I need to lose 45 pounds, doesn't matter. What does your body need to stay where you are? Because I think there's value in that. And in fact, I'd say it's probably one of the most valuable things at any course in a weight loss journey or in a weight maintenance journey or in a body composition journey is to just understand, how do I stay here? Because what happens is people dive into a calorie deficit. That calorie deficit is way too low. Then they're hungry, they're starving, but they lose the weight. They fight it tooth and nail, right? They end up losing the weight. And then, they go on to a new weight, but they don't understand how to eat for that new weight. So they go back to their old eating habits, and slowly but surely the weight comes back. And now they're frustrated and they have to do it again, rinse and repeat. That is the biggest problem. And so when we're a lot more intentional and we know what our body needs right now, then that can really, really help with respect to all of those other kind of goals. So that's the first thing I'll say about calorie tracking. I think it's really important to understand at least the protein that you're eating and the fiber that you're eating. And in my opinion, if you eat enough fiber, which the recommended fiber for for women is 25 to 35 grams a day. And I would challenge you to hit that upper limit. The more fiber you eat, the more full you're going to be, the more likely you're going to have those more regulated satiety signals. Okay. So keeping in mind, when we fuel ourselves properly, we're going to be more full. The deficit is not going to feel as crazy if we have to be in a deficit, right? A layer onto that is, once you know what you need for your body to maintain your weight, then we can start to play around, if weight loss is a goal, with a modest deficit that doesn't leave you feeling awful. And in my opinion, if you cannot hit a modest deficit that helps you lose weight and doesn't make you feel awful, then we need to work on building muscle mass. We need to work on making sure that you're active enough, building muscle, being super consistent so that you can be in a modest deficit and it doesn't become too low or your cravings become too high or something else. Okay. And so we have to kind of work our way backwards. Also, I find a lot of women have been in a deficit for so long, like years and years and years. They're like, I've eaten 1,200 calories for the past 10 years and now I don't lose weight. Well, at that point, we need a reset. We need a refresh. Again, we need to go back to, what amount of calories are you burning at rest? Again, these are all estimated numbers. And what are you burning, over a day, a typical day of movement? And how can we modify that in one way or another? Okay. So now let's talk about kind of the nuance I wanted to get into today in terms of the mitochondria. So you guys have probably heard in grade 9 science class that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. And what's interesting is new research has just come out in mitochondrial medicine and obesity. And the reason why I thought this was important to bring up is because I think the research is really cool. It gives us a lot of insight into what we're kind of missing in some of these conversations. In some of these conversations where we're saying, oh, you just need to eat less. Oh, you just need to move more, right? We're missing the role of what else goes on when you are overweight that leads it to be so difficult to lose that weight. And so that's what I want to talk about right now. So the research on looking at the mitochondria is really interesting to me because it looks at how, it reframes obesity as a problem of how the body processes energy, not just how much food is coming in. So at the center of this is the mitochondria, okay? So the mitochondria is responsible for taking in nutrients and converting them to usable energy. The mitochondria also balances and is responsible for whether or not the body burns fuel or it stores it, how sensitive cells are to insulin, and this is a big one, and how much inflammation is present in the system. So when everything is working kind of according to plan, your body can switch between burning carbohydrates and burning fat depending on what's needed. We know our energy production is more efficient and excess fuel can be managed without an issue. So you have one day where you eat poorly or you have a couple days where you eat poorly and your body just figures it out. In a state of obesity, that system breaks down. So we start with a constant influx of nutrients. This is particularly glucose and fatty acids. Now, again, I've already talked about at the beginning of this video, all the reasons why weight gain became a thing and we led to being overweight. And it's not all just eating too much. We've already talked about that. But what I want to drive home here is that once your body's in that state, there's a number of processes that happen that make it really difficult to get out of. And that's what we're here for. So if you're just joining, that's what I want to talk about right now. So basically, when we have this influx of nutrients beyond what we're willing to deal with, your mitochondria become overwhelmed. They cannot fully process what they're being given. And so instead of cleanly converting fuel into energy like it used to, your system starts to produce these partially processed byproducts. These byproducts accumulate inside cells and they interfere with metabolic signaling. Now, what does that mean? Insulin. Okay, so one of the most important consequences of this signaling disruption is insulin signaling. Cells become less responsive to insulin, which means your sugars are not going to be taken up as efficiently. So when we talk about the idea of insulin resistance and how it happens, one of the things that I talk about a lot is the fact that insulin resistance essentially drives pretty much every chronic illness, including the inability to lose weight. And one of the things that happens, so if we picture, I always explain to patients, insulin is, glucose is the thing and insulin is the hormonal response to that thing. And so if we look at those two things, we can kind of break it down in a pathway. So essentially what happens is first, our body takes food, right? Breaks it down into sugar. Then our pancreas says, oh, we have to make insulin. So we make insulin. As a result, insulin, walks on over and opens the cell door and says, sugar, come on in. We need to use you for energy. And so we do that. And in a properly functioning system, we do that quite well. But what ends up happening is over time, if there is again, there's so many reasons why that signaling to insulin might be disrupted. But let's just use the picture or use the example of estrogen changes plus high stress plus lower muscle mass plus poor sleep, right? We are now in insulin resistance land. So now we bring in that food, that fuel, we break it down to glucose. We make that insulin. Body's looking around like, where's the insulin, right? We're not responsive to insulin. And so what has to happen is we make more insulin because I jokingly describe it to patients as, you yell at your kids to do something, you tell them again and again and again, and they just like tune you out at some point. They stop listening. This is what's happening, right? Insulin's there. We are just not responding. So the compensation is make more insulin, make more, excuse me. Eventually, the cell responds. Eventually, it's like, oh, right, there's insulin here. We should probably do something about that. But the problem is, it creates this vicious cycle where we keep producing more insulin and higher insulin levels, which is going to further promote fat storage, right? We know that insulin is a storage hormone. It's going to have our fat more likely to be stored. We're not going to burn fuel when insulin is up. And I always jokingly tell patients, like, when cells are bathing in insulin, picture it as, when your hormones are functioning, they're going down a highway, okay? And they're always making it to their different receptors. Looking at your hormones in blood work is one thing, but actually looking at it in real life and how they're working is a totally other thing, right? When we're looking at how hormones work, they're going down a highway, okay? And they all are getting off at their various exits, doing their thing. In the presence of insulin resistance, or while your cells are bathing in insulin, there's so much insulin around, we don't know what to do with it. What ends up happening is it's like you going down the highway and there's this big fog storm or there's this big rainstorm. And all of a sudden you're like, okay, well, I'm either going to slow down, pull over, go home. I just might not make it to my exit. And that's what happens when you feel like crap and you go to the doctor. You're like, I think it's my thyroid. And they're like, good news. Your thyroid's actually perfect, right? It's because potentially the numbers are great. The numbers are all there. But are the thyroid hormones able to do what they need to do in the presence of insulin resistance or inflammation? The answer is no, right? So this is what we're dealing with. So again, coming back to the idea of the mitochondria, we're functioning less efficiently. We are compensating by creating higher insulin levels, creating this cycle. At the same time, your mitochondria are producing what's called more reactive oxygen species, ROS. These are damaging molecules. Usually your body in normal functioning capacity we can clean that up. We make ROS, we clean it up. This is our antioxidant system, right? We make pro-oxidants, we clean them up. We make pro-oxidants, we clean them up. But what happens is now our antioxidant systems are impacted, right? So we have more ROS, which damages cells, right? And now this can actually damage the mitochondria itself. This leads to a feedback loop. More mitochondrial function starts to decline over time. Now we have a balance between energy production and oxidative stress. Normally there's this controlled system, right? Like I said, we have a production of pro-oxidants and we clean them up. We neutralize them. In this state, the balance shifts further towards cell damage, which contributes to inflammation and further metabolic disruption. Again, I come back to that conversation in real life. If your signaling is off, you aren't going to be able to tell in your brain when you're hungry, when you're full. So typically you end up being hungry at the wrong times and full at the wrong times, right? You wake up, you're like, Laura, I have no appetite. And then in the evening, you're like, I could eat everything in this house, right? And so that's where things shift. We also know that the number and quality of mitochondria also change. Your body's going to produce fewer new mitochondria. Again, powerhouse of the cell. This is how we create energy. This is how we use, and create energy and fuel. We have fewer of these. Damaged ones are not cleared effectively. Again, we have a population of mitochondria that are less capable of producing energy and more likely to generate stress signals. We also have fat tissue that's impacted here. As your mitochondria become less effective at burning fat, your fat cells actually enlarge and become dysfunctional. This leads to more local inflammation within the fat tissue, and we release more inflammatory signals into circulation. These signals further impair insulin sensitivity and metabolic regulation in other tissues. Fat begins to accumulate in places that it normally would not, such as the liver and the muscle. When we interfere with liver function, that is not good, right? That goes to our cholesterol balance and everything else, right? The liver can, when we have, fat accumulating in the liver, this leads to fatty liver disease. This worsens sugar regulation. If you didn't know, sugar regulation is partly dealt with in the liver as well, right? In muscle, this is going to reduce the ability for the muscle to take up and use glucose, right? We know that if we actually work our big muscles, we can take up sugar into the muscles and use them for energy. But when we start to accumulate fat in muscle tissue, that is not good, right? We also have a reduced energy expenditure. The body's ability to burn energy at rest decreases. This is because we have reduced mitochondrial activity and we have these changes in fat tissue. So fewer calories are being used even without changes in your intake. This is where we're like, I've changed nothing. I'm eating the same amount, right? We look at this reduction in metabolic rate, and the mitochondria are partly responsible for this, right? So overall, your system shifts into a state where energy is abundant, but it's not being used. So this might mean, when I say abundant, this might mean that you're actually eating the same thing you've always been eating, but it's abundant for your body. Your body is not using it properly. Your body does not know how to use it. Fat is stored rather than oxidized. Insulin levels are elevated. I already told you what happens when your cells are swimming in insulin. Inflammation is chronically present. Energy production is impaired at the cellular level. So from an intervention standpoint, the goal is not just to reduce calories, but we have to restore mitochondrial function so we can improve how the body actually handles energy. So what are the ways to do this? The much anticipated answers to these problems. Ultimately, exercise. Exercise, I urge you to look at exercise from a standpoint of mitochondrial function, muscle mass, mood regulation, appetite regulation, and not from a weight loss perspective. Because when we look at caloric expenditure overall, the reality is a very small amount of the calories that you burn come from specifically structured exercise. Okay, that is the reality. But exercise stimulates the production of new mitochondria, improves their efficiency, increases the body's ability to burn both fat and glucose. It improves insulin sensitivity and reduces the buildup of harmful metabolic byproducts. Like exercise helps you detox. It moves your lymphatic fluid. It helps with drainage, right? If we think about, we see all these detoxes. Let's all detox, spring detox. But like exercise is the way we detox. Sweating is the way we detox, right? We do know that reducing nutrient overload is also important. But like I said, when we look at this from a weight loss perspective and a weight loss conversation, one of the problems we run into real quick here is if you're at a state where you have so much mitochondrial dysfunction, poor signaling, insulin sensitivity, inflammation, like everything's just a mess. It's really hard to get you to a place where we can reduce your caloric intake to a point where that feels even a little bit sustainable, right? And so sometimes we actually have to just work our way backwards. We say, okay, let's start by looking at where the things are, right? Do you have low iron? Do you have low vitamin D? Do you have low B12? Is your insulin a problem? Are you super inflamed? What is your exercise? Are you sleeping? Like all of those things. Sometimes we need to work backwards and say, let's just fix a few of these things so that we actually can get you in a calorie deficit. And for weight loss, you objectively have to be in a calorie deficit. You do. But like I've said, getting there is kind of a lot of the problem for people. They end up in something that's too low and not sustainable and just doesn't make sense. Okay. So again, we can reduce calories, or we can start a little bit more strategically by saying, let's just actually, space out your meals. Let's space out your meals in a way that your body has time to process and clear fuel. Maybe that means that we just say, let's do 3 meals, no snacks, or let's implement some intermittent fasting. So we're not going to actually touch our track right this moment. We might, we probably will. But right this moment, we're going to say, let's just create some space. Let's allow your digestive system and your body overall 14 to 16 hours between your last meal and your first meal, allowing time for your body to process that meal before we introduce more food, right? It allows the body time to clear fuel when your system's not continuously overloaded, like snack, 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 snack. Where are my grazers at? Grazing is the worst thing you can do for this picture, right? She's like, I don't really like a meal. I'm more of a snacker, right? Don't be a snacker. You can have snacks, but let's concentrate them in spaces of time so your body has a lot more capacity to deal with that. Now, again, if you don't have a problem, we're not fixing something that's not broken. But I'm saying if you are struggling, stopping grazing is probably a good idea. Just let the body handle it and then move forward. Some people find this really helpful to do 2 meals a day. They're like, I just prefer a big lunch and a decent dinner, and then that's it. Some people like 3 meals. It depends on the person. But I'm saying this is one of the strategies that we can help clear that excess fuel and reduce that oxidative stress. Now, nutrient quality matters because your mitochondria rely on specific vitamins and minerals to function properly. Deficiencies in these can actually impair energy production and worsen metabolic dysfunction. Is it true that you can eat anything and lose weight? Yes. You're going to be miserable and you're probably going to gain it back. You could eat McDonald's for every single meal and lose weight. You could if you were in a calorie deficit. But ultimately, you're going to gain it back if you're not, meeting those nutrition goals, right? So that is, that is the reality of that. And we know that protein intake supports muscle mass. We know that your muscle is a major site of glucose disposal. Maintaining or increasing your muscle mass is going to improve your overall metabolic capacity. So it is really important, even if you're like, but I haven't noticed a big change in my body as I started working out 10 days ago, right? That's the thing is when it comes to exercise, the results are very slow, very slow. Okay. So that's just something we have to implement and put it in our life and not even look back at it. This is what we do. We exercise because we're improving our metabolic capacity. We exercise because we need more mitochondria. We need more energy efficiency. We exercise because we want to be strong. We exercise because we want to get off the toilet when we're 85. We don't exercise because we're trying to lose weight. You can't, but it will be part of the overall strategy when we're actually implementing this is how you need to lose weight. Because you'll see coaches online or whoever, these unqualified people, talking about how it's just diet. You don't need to exercise to lose weight. I guess, but where does that leave you ultimately? Do you want to just lose all your muscle mass? Because that is what's going to happen. And then you're going to be in a worse state. This happens for any situation of rapid weight loss. You're going to lose muscle. You're not going to do well long term. We're trying to create a situation where it's sustainable and there's some longevity to this. We also know fat quality plays a role. Certain fats contribute to the formation of harmful lipid intermediates, while others support mitochondrial membranes and reduce inflammation. Again, there's also a role, I talked about oxidative stress, where we actually improve that balance between oxidative stress and antioxidant defenses. So we don't want to eliminate ROS, the oxidative stress, completely. That's part of life. That's part of how our body's supposed to function. But we want our body to help be able to restore that and manage it quicker. Okay. So these are kind of all of the ways that we look at weight loss from a much larger, big scale picture, and how we can actually intervene. So let's get into some specifics. So we know that resistance, so exercise, you're going to be like, well, what should I do? Right? Everybody gets really on board to, I see these, especially on TikTok, I see videos all the time like, my body didn't change till I started Pilates specifically. And I didn't do well till I only strength trained, or I just started running, or I started biking. The reality is you need a bit of everything. It's like anything in life. Too much of one thing is too much of one thing. But we can balance things out and we can do things in a way that can benefit us. So we know that resistance training improves your glucose disposal, increases your muscle mitochondrial density. That's a good thing. We know that aerobic training improves your oxidative capacity. And we know that HIIT helps your mitochondria adapt. So people are like, oh, someone told me that HIIT increases my stress hormone and my cortisol is going to make me gain weight. Don't do so much HIIT. Don't do HIIT every day. But maybe, once a week, if you're going from nothing, 0 to 100 is too much. But maybe you do a HIIT workout once a week and that's your HIIT. And then you do 2 really good higher intensity walks. You do, 1 or 2 strength training. We have to map it out. You do a couple of yoga. Maybe you add in a Pilates, like mix and match, because everything is important. The types of ways you can move your body are the most important. Look at the things you like. So personally, I really love my spin bike. So that is my cardio of choice. But I also realize that I have to do other things. I don't like yoga, but it's probably what I have to incorporate, right? And if you're like, I don't like cardio, well, then that's what you have to do. So work up to what you need to be doing. We know that reducing your caloric overload, again, this might be a down the road plan, but that needs to happen, because exercise and all the other things without reducing caloric overload is not getting rid of the root cause. If it's too much for your body to handle, we're not gonna be able to process it. But if we up our capacity, then we actually might not have to be in such a deficit when we go there, right? We know that when we look at the types of fats, we are really focusing on those omega-3 fatty acids. They improve mitochondrial membrane function and reduce inflammation. And you're going to be like, Laura, what omega-3 supplement should I take? Start with diet. Eat fish. The amount of adults that won't eat fish is wild to me. Sometimes we do things because we know that they're good for us. Sometimes we don't do things because it's like our favorite thing to do, right? Sometimes we choose to do something because we know it's going to make us better, right? And sometimes that happens with exercise. Like, oh, I really hate exercise. But have you ever done a workout and not injured yourself, but done a workout and felt crappy? Usually you feel so much better, even if it's a really good walk or something. You're like, oh, in it, you hate it. But when you get out of there, you're like, the dopamine, I feel great. Same thing happens when you're consistently eating a really good quality diet. Fish is really important. And fish is one of the reasons why the Mediterranean diet is hands down, bar none, the best studied diet across the board for all health concerns. None of this carnivore, keto, none of this. Those are not long-term strategies. And carnivore honestly terrifies me. With the rising numbers of colon cancer, the lack of fiber, the importance of the microbiome in literally all health conditions. A lot of the research on carnivore, specifically, people who are hardcore carnivores are going to be mad, but it's anecdotal at best. There's not a lot of long-term stuff. People often feel better because they've just taken out the crap in their diet. But the lack of fiber is a problem, right? But we need good, healthy fats. So we need to incorporate omega-3s. However you're going to do that, it's in chia seeds, in flax seeds. I have a great chia pudding recipe that is delicious. And that is an amazing way to get your omega-3s in. You don't have to eat fish, but I think you should. I think you should try to eat fish as a grown adult doing good things for their body, right? Now, what are the required nutrients for mitochondrial function? Magnesium, B vitamins, especially B1, B2, B3, B5, iron. If you are chronically iron deficient, this is part of the problem. We can't link, and we're not trying to link, iron intake to weight loss. That's not what's happening. But we need to have iron for a properly functioning thyroid, and we need to have iron in order to up that mitochondrial function so we can do everything that I've talked about in the last 35 minutes, right? CoQ10, right? If you remember the electron transport back from, grade 9 science. L-carnitine helps fat transport into the mitochondria. And alpha lipoic acid helps balance that redox, those redox reactions, that antioxidant, pro-oxidant. And we know that deficiencies in any of these things impair your fat oxidation. We know that specifically supporting the liver, supporting glutathione is important for that antioxidant piece, right? Polyphenols, vitamin C. What are polyphenols? Polyphenols are in anything that's colorful. So peppers, berries, coffee has polyphenols. So, drink your coffee. But really, it's all about figuring out how can we create that balance, mainly from diet. Supplements are going to be helpful when we decide that they're needed and targeted, because what we don't want is you to take a million things that then have to be processed by the liver and the gut, and then now you're in the same spot you were in before, right? It's not about taking more supplements. It's about looking at how we can create lifestyle interventions that make some of this ultimate goal of weight loss a lot easier. So we know that the exercise is helpful. We know fasting can be helpful, and caloric restriction is pretty much a non-negotiable at some point. Okay. We also know that targeting that adipose tissue inflammation, because like I said, we end up in this inflammatory cycle, this loop where we can't trust our own hormonal signals. We can't trust our own full signals, and we can't trust our own hunger signals. So what we need to do is reduce the inflammation. Now we can do that by treating the gut microbiome. We can do that by anti-inflammatory diet type strategies. We can also do that with weight loss. We know weight loss directly reduces inflammation. Even if, let's say everything else is balanced and you just need to go in a little bit of a caloric deficit to lose weight, that can reduce inflammation. We also know that creating short chain fatty acids is really important. This happens in the gut by the gut microbiome. And we know that short chain fatty acids improve mitochondrial function and also have research to improve insulin sensitivity. This is why diets like carnivore scare me, because there is absolutely no fiber. And that lack of fiber is going to mean absolutely no short chain fatty acids. In my opinion, these diets are a lot more inflammatory. But how we do that is fiber, prebiotics, treating the gut, getting rid of any sort of infections, microbiome support. And so, kind of like in summary, when we look at obesity and being overweight, I think it's important to reframe this as partly a failure of energy production rather than just an increased intake. This is why people struggle. This is why entire businesses are literally made from, helping people lose weight because they know they're going to gain it back. So they know they're going to be back, right? They don't teach them the strategies to maintain. They're like, here, eat nothing, use my products, and then, good luck. And the key drivers that we need to be assessing are insulin resistance, inflammation, micronutrient status, muscle mass, and gut health. Okay. So in summary, that's what I want you to think about as it pertains to weight loss. If you are live on Instagram or TikTok, this replay will be available on my YouTube, on my Facebook. So if you want to go back and watch the whole thing, feel free to do that. And I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of your day, and we will chat at the next live. Bye, guys.